Over there, don't you? Can you hear me now? There we go. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jan Pizzuto. That's a kind of a strange name if you don't know me. Jan is my first name. One of those names you get, a lot of shit for when you're a little kid. But it's actually a guy's name if you live in a Scandinavian country. If you don't, then you're in trouble, and I don't. So it is what it is. But I just want to give you a quick 30-second testimony here before we start. My story is I went to church as a kid, but as a teenager, as a young man, I strayed from the faith. I said I don't want to have anything to do with God. I said I know how to run my life better than anybody, and I promptly ran it into the ground. I was a thief. I was a liar. I had an unfaithful heart. I was addicted to pornography for many years. And I almost destroyed my marriage. Through some Christ-like love, I was able to get outside of myself. God got a hold of my heart, and He changed me. He redeemed my life. He redeemed my marriage. He redeemed my life. He blessed my life in almost every area, basically. It's incredible. And so I'm here today to tell you about God, how excited I am about God. I think that He can change your life. If you're struggling, look to Him. So anyway, I recently preached a message about wisdom, and I want to recap that for some of you who weren't here for that. We talked about a few things. We talked about King Solomon and his reign and his wisdom. And we talked about the promise of the Bible that says that if you ask God for wisdom, He will give it to you. That's a pretty spectacular promise. There's no conditions there. It doesn't say you have to be holy first. It doesn't say you have to live in a monastery to get that. It doesn't say, just if you ask it, if you seek it, if you want His wisdom, He'll give it to you. So just a question, out of show of hands, how many of you have ever prayed that prayer? Nice. If you have not prayed that prayer, I want to ask you, what are you waiting for? That's one of those deals you cannot pass up, right? So I talked about the idea that I prayed that prayer in my late 20s when I came to Christ, and my son prayed that prayer as a young boy, and I thought, well, that's going to be an interesting experiment to see how our lives compare. And he has exceeded anything I would ever have expected. He is, wise beyond his years, mature beyond his years, and his wisdom as a young man is something I rarely see in people. So one other thing we talked about was the idea that wisdom doesn't come from experience necessarily, right? That's the common answer. Wisdom comes from experience, but it's not really true. I mean, all of us know people who continue to make the same mistake over and over again. It might even be us without getting the lesson, right? So clearly, wisdom doesn't correlate with experience. And then there are a select few people, my son being one of them, who can sometimes get the lesson without having to make the mistake. So they can get the wisdom without the experience. So anyway, let me grab my notes here. So I'm going to need my notes. So today I want to delve deeper into this idea that wisdom comes from God. And if you want to give me that first, there it is. So this is kind of Wisdom 2.0 today. We're going to talk about that. Would somebody mind reading the first verse on your Bible verses from today?
So now, my sons, listen to me. Happy are those who keep my ways. Happy is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For he who finds me life and obtains favor from the Lord, but he who misses me injures himself. All who hate me love death.
That's some pretty dramatic language there, right? He who finds me finds life. This is the personification of wisdom talking, if you didn't understand that. He who finds me finds life, obtains favor from the Lord. He who misses me injures himself. He who hates me loves death. I mean, that's either this is really theatrical language, overly theatrical language, or this is a really serious issue here, really serious topic. So now this can kind of be summed up a little bit more succinctly if you look at this next slide here. Right? I mean, that's kind of what it's saying, right? So, all right, so today I want to address this. I want to address one particular phrase, one particular theme that runs throughout the whole Bible. And that phrase is kind of a confusing one. it's a weird one. It's a churchy one. So if you're a seeker, if you're an atheist, you're going to be like, what does that mean? We're going to talk about it today. It's called the fear of the Lord. And it pops up probably over 100 times in the Bible. And I'm going to have you guys read, if you will. Would somebody mind grabbing the next couple of verses off of there and reading those?
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight.
Nice. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Awesome. Anybody else take the next couple?
By steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned, and by the fear of the Lord one turns away. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble.
Very good. Thank you. And the last two, anybody else?
Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Blessed is the one who fears the Lord always, but whoever hardens his heart will fall into calamity.
Awesome. Thank you. So fear of the Lord comes up a lot. And our initial thought when we hear that is, be afraid of the Lord, right? Shake. Don't hit me, Lord, right? And that's not what this is talking about. I want to address that a little bit, but first I want to look at a couple of quick verses. Proverbs 1:7 says, "Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Proverbs is saying the foundation of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So knowledge, wisdom. There's a place in the Bible, actually in Job, where God tells us how important this is, and He says, "Have you considered my servant?" This is my best God voice. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in all the earth, a man who fears God and shuns evil." So this phrase, the fear of the Lord, seems to be something that's a summary of what we're supposed to do and be. So what does it mean? Well, let's look at a couple of those verses again. Foundation of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Do you realize how radical this? Do you realize what this is saying? I'm going to say something that might be startling to some of you. It might sound absolutely crazy to some of you. What this is saying, what Proverbs is saying, is that your relationship with God, your understanding of God, is the foundation for your very thinking. Okay? In other words, it's saying your relationship with God completely determines what you know about the world and how you know it. Now that's an astonishing statement, right? That's pretty radical. Now, in our modern society, we have a little bit of a different view, right? We say faith is something that we believe about God, but we usually relegate that to our private lives, and we believe that faith is somewhat opposed to reason, right? Or our thinking, and we think that reason or our thinking is something that can operate apart from faith and can tell us all kinds of things about the world, right? It's a very typical belief. Case in point, I'll give you a quote from Christopher Reeves. He was giving a graduation address, and he said, "When it comes to matters of public, no religion should be allowed a seat at the table." Right? That's a very typical belief in our society, that faith is for private lives, but for public discourse, there we have to use reason, only the things that we can empirically prove. So, I'll give you a quote by a German scholar named Gerhard Funrad. He wrote a book about Proverbs, and he says this, and I think it's kind of fascinating what he said. He said, faith is not only not opposed to reason, but constitutes its possibility, its connection to reality. Now, if you're a non-believer, bear with me here. I'm going to break this down. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, I think all of you in this room would agree with me that in order for you to have wisdom, you have to be connected with reality. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Right? The fool is always departing from reality, right? So they're always basing their decisions on incorrect information. Does that make sense? So you have to be in touch with reality, okay? So if God exists, then He's actually not only part of reality, He's the maker of reality. He's the upholder of reality. So in order for us to have wisdom, if God exists, then we would have to be in touch with him, or we would be out of touch with reality. Does that make sense? So that's kind of, a statement that conflicts with a lot of things you hear in our modern day society. What is the nature of reality? Well, we could have some deep conversations about that. Something else you hear in our society is that the only things we can be sure of are the things that can be scientifically proven, right? And I'd love to launch into a long exposition on the scientific method and what that means and how it's actually a process of guesswork and observations and experimentation and more guesswork and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into that too much, but let's suffice it to say that this statement, the only things we can really be sure of are the things that are scientifically proven, can't be scientifically proven. You can't prove that statement. So some of you in this room, you might not believe that anything that happens on this earth has a supernatural cause. And if you believe that, that's fine, but that's a belief. And here's the point I want to make about that. You've taken that belief by faith. You've made a leap of faith to get there. And once you've taken that view by faith, all your reasoning proceeds from it. You screen out everything else that doesn't fit with it. Here's another example of modern thinking. You'll hear people say a lot of times, every individual must be free to determine what is right or wrong for him or her. In other words, don't impose your morality or your religion on me, right? Very common in today's society. But that philosophy assumes something very significant, actually. It assumes that there is either no God or there's a God who doesn't care about our actions or beliefs, right? So how do you know that? I mean, how do you know there's no God? Can you prove that? Can you empirically prove there's no God? You can't. You're taking that on faith. In fact, you're betting your whole life on that, your entire destiny on that. And that's a leap of faith. Give me more. There's my best leap of faith slide there. So, all right, so, it takes just as much faith to believe there is no God as it does to believe there is a God. And I'm standing here as someone who used to not believe in God. And I can tell you that for me, it might be weird for me to be standing here and tell you that I actually think it's a way bigger leap of faith to not believe in God than it is to believe in God. And for some of you who don't believe in God, that sounds crazy, but there you have it. Now, skeptics, so typically skeptics think, I have doubt, religious people have faith, right? But that's not really true. They both have faith. Everybody is living their lives on some kind of a leap of faith. So David Klingenhofer says this. I'm going to read a quote from him. He says, "What we're observing in our society seems to be the struggle of religion against no religion. In actuality, it's the conflict between various religions, including secularism. Now, if you object that secularism, I can't say that very well, secularism isn't a religion because it has no deity, let us remember that religions like Zen Buddhism also lack belief in God. So what is a religion then? A system of beliefs explaining where life comes from, what life means, and what we as living beings are supposed to be doing with our allotted hours. Allotted years. Hopefully we have more than hours. So, all right, so the point I want to make is that everybody has a faith view. Everybody has to base their entire life, their entire reasoning, on some belief they have about God. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Now, I'm going to preach out of the side of my mouth here because I totally fall short on this a lot. But what this means is your relationship with God has to be absolutely central. It can't be something you do once a week. It can't be something that just enhances your life a little bit. The question is not how can I use God to get the life I want, but how can the life I'm living get me to God? Because getting to God is the most important part. If you are out of touch with God, you will be out of touch with reality. So all right. So let's talk about this word fear. Again, I want to outline that the term fear of God is different from just the word fear. A couple of verses to help break that down. Deuteronomy 10:12. What has the Lord your God required of you? To fear the Lord your God, to love him and serve him with all your soul. Now, if you notice, it doesn't say you can either fear or love him, right? Those two are somehow involved with each other. And then there's Psalm 130, verse 4. But with you there is forgiveness, therefore I fear you. Now, wait a second. If God were more forgiving, right, we should be less afraid of him, wouldn't you think? So again, this is not talking about traditional fear. I'm going to share with you Tim Keller's definition of fear of the Lord, and I need to give him a lot of credit for the material in this sermon. He's one of my favorite pastors. He says, it's a life rearranging, joyful awe and wonder before the greatness of God and what he's done. A life rearranging, joyful awe and wonder before the greatness of God and what he's done. Kind of almost a reverence. I don't know why they didn't just use that word reverence, maybe it'd be easier, but they didn't. So I asked another person I think is very wise, her name is Jody, and what she thought of her definition. I think hers is actually even in some ways better than Tim Keller's, but she says this. She says, to the extent that our limitations allow, the fear of the Lord is an understanding of the absolute greatness of God compared to who we are. And I'll get into why I think that's such a good definition. Now again, why use the word fear? I can't necessarily answer that. I can give you a couple of ideas maybe. The first one is that the joy we get from the gospel is a humbling joy. The core message of the gospel is you're more sinful than you ever realized, but you're more loved than you could ever imagine. Right? That's like 10-second gospel. So there's a humility there, right? And looking especially at Jody's definition, it's crucial for us to be able to understand the gap between our level of understanding and God's level of understanding, right? I mean, let's face it, right? If we don't recognize that God's more powerful, more loving, more wise, etc., then we're not even going to listen to him, right? So if we recognize that gap, and it's hard for us to recognize that gap. That's why Jody says, to the extent that our limitations allow. We're sort of resistant to recognizing that gap, like somehow it makes us feel worse or be less of a person or something. So humbling tends to be kind of a negative word in our society, but I want to tell you that this grace, this love that comes from the gospel is so unmerited that it does something for us. It takes off of us the burden of self-importance. It takes off the burden of having to prove ourselves worthy. So I can stand here before you today without any fear of judgment because I know I'm not worthy. I know I can't prove myself worthy. If you believe the gospel, what the gospel says is that grace is unmerited, it's free grace. You could never possibly prove yourself worthy. So now you can stop trying. What a relief. All those things you've been doing all these years to prove yourself worthy, you can stop now. Isn't that great? It's so fun. It's so freeing. Now, one more thought about the term fear. Psychologists will tell us, interestingly enough, they will tell us that if you find your greatest fear, there you will also find your greatest love, right? If, for example, you love money more than anything in the world, your greatest fear is going to be losing it all. So all of us start our relationship with God on a conditional basis. We say, God, I'll follow you if. Say, God, I'll trust you if. Right? And the interesting thing is, whatever's on the other side of that if is your true love. So, if it's well, I'll trust you if my life goes better, if I get healing, if I'm successful, whatever it is, that points to your true love. So I want to have a little discussion. I've been talking a lot. I want to break up and have some table discussions here. Have you ever talked to God and said, I will follow you if? What was on the other side of that if? And then one last question, what's on the other side of that if now? Take a few minutes, talk amongst yourselves. Water here. Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. Did you hear me? I started to talk to myself there. I was like, I'm gonna stop.
Thank God he didn't listen to me. So, he knew that eventually I was going to follow him. I mean, I would have never met her if I started following him. I think the wisdom there is that you start following God first. So you start following him first, and then you start listening. But it's not like a Las Vegas thing like saved.
Love it. Okay, take a couple of minutes and wrap up if you will. I better have to turn the mic back on. Take just a couple of minutes and wrap up if you will.
Yeah, if he doesn't answer it.
I love it. All right, if you guys will wrap it up, that'd be awesome. God, I'm talking. That's good. Thanks. Thanks. All right. Does anybody have anything they want to share? I'm not going to go table to table, but anybody wants to shout anything out, please just feel free. We're casual here. So, anybody, any thoughts on what's on the other side of the if?
So mine wasn't directly about if blah 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 if this. It was when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. I was raised in a Lutheran church, so I was I wouldn't say very religious, but I had my beliefs and my spirituality. My mom was all in, a true believer. Wasn't angry at God, but in my mind I never prayed that if you do this, God, then this. I just, in a roundabout way, that's where I was grasping at my beliefs was. If I see this happen, then I know my mom gets healed, and she did. She passed away of cancer. She healed, unfortunately, but I had those arguments in my mind. So
Perfect. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, healing's a big one, right? For us or for other people, and sometimes even more for other people. We're like, if you don't heal that person, well, then I don't believe in you, kind of a thing. So, right. Lisa?
One of your questions was, what's on the other side of the if now? And for me, I don't want, and I'm not in any way saying I have arrived, but I try to keep nothing on the other side of the if. I believe. And it's not based on if you do this, if you do that. I just have gotten to the point where, I've seen some bad stuff in my life, and in my mind, the bad stuff in this world is just a result of sin being here. It rains on the good, it rains on the bad, and it can't really be put into little boxes of, hey, if you do this, you're going to get this result. If you do this, you're going to get this result. So I try to keep nothing on the other side of that. I've tried living without him for a number of years. Like you, totally messed up my life. And now that I'm back, I'm not saying I don't mess things up, because God knows I do. But the peace that I have now, knowing that I'm trying, and that he has forgiven me and he loves me. And I know, I'm probably one of the more people here. I'm getting closer to that time when I don't exist anymore. I have such a peace knowing where I'm going, that this is not, my death is not the end of my life. I am going to heaven, I'm going to see my mom and dad.
That's awesome. Awesome, thank you.
I try not to do any ifs on the other side.
Very cool. Very cool. You get it. That's right. It's the ifs. Yes. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, I'm with you in that sense that I try not to keep things if that happens, God, like you perform this miracle, you do this, or you heal my wife, do this financially. We all try to strive for that. I think that's our nature. I think with God, goes back to Romans 8, everything works to his purpose, and I think he works through us and will work it all out in his purpose ultimately. And I think he does that in every individual, and we all kind of give up on the end. We would love to say we give up on everything, because honestly, we don't. Do we really truly trust him with all our money? Do we really trust him with our health in this circumstance when you think you know better? But I think you get closer and closer as you get closer to God. That's the biggest part. It's just having him understand his love and what he did for you, and the sacrifice that was made. And he's God. You want to talk about fear of God? You bring up Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and you start reading those chapters. You understand how big God is and how little we are. And it's like, man, why wouldn't you trust him? So I guess that's kind of where I come from.
Nice, thanks. You guys get this. You guys should be preaching here. When are you guys preaching? Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to add?
I was going to say, back to the healing. My mom was sick probably the majority of my life. Probably since I was 5. And I was always angry at God because I saw her suffer. And I would pray to God, if you heal my mom, I'll be a better person. I was quite the rebellious person, believe it or not. I see like an angel that I would. But anyway, it was not until my mom passed away that I thought I had peace with God. And then that's when, shortly after, several months later, is when I gave my life to Christ. So I knew where she went. At that moment, I already knew there was a God, but I really knew there was a God, because I felt my mom was brought to heaven at that point. She was not suffering, and that was just really life-changing for me. Her actually dying for me to come to know him better and more on a personal relationship.
Interesting. Okay. Very cool.
I had an if when I was 25. I said, I'll follow you if you find a way to move me closer to my family. And then he did it, and then I didn't follow.
Yeah, how many of us have always made good on our promises to God, right? right? Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. He's faithful nonetheless. It's amazing. Any other thoughts, Matt?
God, if you help me sell this thing, I'll tithe 10% off of it right off the top.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. If you help me be really rich, I'll give you back 10% of it. Isn't that funny? Oh, that's awesome. All right, fantastic. Well, that's good. It becomes pretty apparent if you're living for your career or your children or for your success, whatever it is, or your healing. You're living in mortal fear of something, the loss of which would render life meaningless, right? If the most important thing for you is healing and you don't get it, your life's done. Life's meaningless. It's over. So it's great. It's great to look at those ifs because they show you what your greatest love is. So it's possible some of you here believe in God, but He's not your fear. He's not your main passion in life. He's not, the central thing in your life. And I'm starting to recognize this. I'm slow, so maybe some of you guys are way ahead of me on this, but I'm starting to recognize that when God becomes your fear, when He becomes the darling of your heart or the passion of your life, then your whole life changes in some pretty significant ways. That's when you actually begin to know Him. That's when He's what you want, when He's what you're after out of life. When the thing you're most afraid to lose is God, that's when you know that He's your fear, right? And interestingly enough, when He becomes the center of your life, you begin to trust Him unconditionally, and all those other mortal fears that you were living with just dissipate, or at least take a back seat. When you take your hands off your own life, God will be with you. That's another promise in the Bible. Pretty amazing promise, right? All you have to do is just let Him steer. All you have to do, right? That's easy, right? Now, my whole life changed when I received unmerited, undeserved love. I hadn't earned it. I actually, in retrospect, I deserved contempt. And somehow I got this love that got a hold of my heart, and it turned me around in an entirely different direction. My entire personality is different today because of it. It's life-changing. So I can tell you the story of Jesus. I can talk about the grace of God, but that's a concept. I mean, for some people, God's a construct. But have you heard the news? Have you seen? Have you tasted? I mean, it's Jody loves this little statement. She says, it's said that the angels never tire of hearing the gospel. Like, how beautiful must that grace be for that to be the case? Never gets boring. I mean, I don't think we can truly grasp how beautiful it really is entirely. So I want to tell you today, I'm standing here to tell you that God is amazing. He's beautiful. His character is beautiful. He's both righteous and holy, and also graceful and merciful. And those two things don't seem like they can go together. That seems like a paradox. If God's holy, then He can't be forgiving because He's allowing sin. If He's too forgiving, then He can't really be holy, right? Did I say that right? Seems like they don't go together anyway. But it seems like a paradox, but it's not. And I want to give you an analogy to see if I can help you guys understand that. And do you have any parents in here? Raise your hand if you're a parent. Okay, great. What happens when parents are always forgiving and merciful, but have no commitment to the truth or doing what's right?
Raised in the monsters.
Right. You spoil the child, right? You raise monsters. I heard lots of different things there. That's awesome. All right, now on the flip side, what happens if the parents are absolutely 100% committed to righteousness, justice, and they have no mercy? Absolutely rebellion, you're right. Yep. It spoils the child, right? Same thing, it spoils the child. So in order for you to raise a functional, healthy, capable adult, you have to have both, right? How does that work? I mean, I think that's maybe our only analogy that can help us understand what God's character is like in that respect. I mean, He's so much far beyond anything that we can understand, and He works all those things together. But But anyway, God's both of those things. So, how else can I get you to God? I wish I could just zap you and have the experience and now you trust Him. It's a process, I know. I think that seeing God move is one of the things that just gets me fired up about God and makes me want more to have Him as the central thing in my life. And I think it's really cool that we're here in this place. We're seeing Him move. This is an amazing thing. The fact that we're all here together today is pretty awesome. And so another quick question for you. Not a big discussion, but just a quick question. How does God usually move? Anybody?
In mysterious ways.
In mysterious ways, right? How does God usually use? How does God usually move? Excuse me. Anybody?
He doesn't. He's everywhere.
He doesn't. He's everywhere. Well, no, he moves, but
What do you mean when you say God moves?
moves. When He does things, when He moves in our lives in particular ways that we can see Him, feel Him. What has to happen first?
A lot of times it's through other people, or like He speaks to your heart, and you can confirm that through other people.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I didn't actually think about that answer.
Be willing to accept whatever God. You got to be open to it. And you're not going to believe that God's moving in your life just because you see something miraculous on the street. It's something in your heart. I think you got. Try to get what you're getting here.
Sure. Well, let me go there because I'm maybe confusing you guys. That was a great statement. I'm going to wrap up this sermon by saying kind of that, but he usually works through periods of tribulation, right? I mean, can we all agree that if everything is going perfect and right in our lives, we don't need Him, we don't want Him, right? There's no need for Him. So there's got to be a period of tribulation. Yes?
I don't see Him move until I'm at the end of my rope.
Yeah. That was the way I did it. I never came to God until I was at the bottom of the barrel, right? I'm very stubborn that way. And I know in our society, especially our American society, we are so hell-bent on avoiding pain that we miss out on what God has in store for us. And I kind of shudder to think about all the things I've missed over my life. His plan is so cool. I want to share with you this next quote here. This is one of my favorite quotes. An adventure is only an inconvenience rightly considered. An inconvenience is only an adventure wrongly considered. So what G.K. Chesterton is saying here is that when we're going through trouble, we should view it as an adventure. Because it is, right? I mean, all of you think about adventures. You read books, you watch movies. Your heroes, they go through tremendous hardships. They struggle. They persevere. They overcome. And imagine if your heroes were just bent on taking the least painful route, right? How good would that story be? It would be no story, right? It'd be a boring story, right? So are you willing, are you interested in going on an adventure with God? I know there are some people in here who are struggling with certain things. I know there are people in here who struggle with pain, constant pain, chronic pain. I know there are people here who are asking God, why do I have to live with this? Why can't you take this out of my life? And I can't answer that why for you, other than to tell you this story by Elisabeth Elliot. Elisabeth Elliot, a writer, was staying with a shepherd in northern Wales, and she watched one day as the shepherd was bringing his sheep and rams into a vat of antiseptic that they had to go into or they were going to literally be eaten by insects and parasites. So this is what she saw. One by one, John seized the animals. They would struggle to climb out the side, and Mac the sheepdog would snarl and snap at their faces to force them back under. They tried to climb up the ramp on the far end, but John would catch them, spin them around, force them under again, holding them, ears, eyes, nose submerged. She wrote, I've had some experiences that made me feel very sympathetic to those poor sheep. She did, after all, lose 2 husbands. She had 2 husbands die on her. She said, I couldn't figure out any reason for the treatment I was getting from the great shepherd. I had trusted, and like those sheep, I had no explanation. But she remembered another shepherd who said, sheep lose their direction constantly. Even when you find them, they're difficult to round up. A lost sheep rushes to and fro. And when you find it, you must seize it, cast it down, tie it up, throw it over your shoulder, and carry it home. She said, let me tell you what our problem is. We refuse to admit that the distance between the great shepherd and us sheep, the wisdom differential between the two of us, is infinitely greater than the wisdom differential between a shepherd and his sheep. And sometimes if you're a shepherd to the sheep, the most loving thing you can do is cast it down, tie it up, throw it over your shoulder, without a hint of explanation. So do you recognize, do you see that some of the pain, not all the pain, some of the pain we experience in life is because we refuse to recognize that differential? I don't know why. We just like to think we've got it all together and we know what we're doing. But some of us refuse to trust God at all, or other people for that matter. And on the flip side of that, some people are giving great shepherd prerogatives to people in their lives, right? They're hoping to marry somebody who will fix everything for them, or they hope their parents will fix everything for them, and they're mad at them when they don't. So the fear of the Lord puts you smack in the middle of the hands of God, and that's where you're supposed to be. That's who you're supposed to trust. I want to end with a true test of a believer for you guys. I want to give you a little challenge as we wrap up today, and then we'll pray out here. Two questions. Are you a follower of Christ? Truly a follower of Christ? One question: are you willing to follow God's instructions, His scriptural instructions, even if you don't understand or agree with it? All right, that's a tough question. And secondly, are you willing to accept whatever God sends your way, even if you don't understand it? So if the answer to either of those questions is no, then God's not your fear. Something else is your fear. So I just want to wrap up by telling you today that not only can you trust God, but that when you do, the offshoot of that, the automatic result of that, is you gain access to God's wisdom. And that wisdom will come into your lives. So that's all I've got today. Let's say a quick prayer for those of you who are the praying variety. If you will, I just want to thank you, Lord, for this time together, for this place that Scotty so generously provides for us. We want to hold up to you today Demita, who's going into surgery tomorrow, and we want to ask that you would just bless that process for her, that you would heal her quickly, that you would guide all those doctors' hands, and that everything would go smoothly with that. And also, I'm wondering if you guys would also lift up your prayers with me for a man. We don't usually do this, but I want to pray for somebody outside of the church. His name is Robbie Walker. I became aware of him this past week. He is 44 years old, and he has pancreatic cancer. He has a family and children, and he's terminal. And I just want to ask if you guys would lift your prayers and thoughts to him. He's a follower. He believes, and so that's amazing. No matter what happens, he wins. But I just want to ask, Lord, in your name, if you would touch him, if you would heal him, and bless him and his family. And so that's it. I want to wrap up. Any other closing thoughts or anything anybody else wants to add?
Pray for Melissa Wise, Chris's girlfriend. She had surgery on Friday on her knee.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's do one more quick. Lord, we would ask you also to watch over Chris's Melissa and heal her and bring her back to health as quickly as possible. All right. Thanks, guys. Amen.
Amen.